Hi there, everyone. Welcome to our very last week of Introduction to Philosophy. We're not going to use a board today because we're not really going to get into the specifics of Foucault's view so much as focus on some important themes that he brings up. We began this semester by reading together Immanuel Kant's short work, What is Enlightenment? And we read this because I think that this work can speak to the value of doing philosophy, which is specifically that it helps you mature, it helps you grow up, it helps you be more free. Why does Kant believe that? Kant believes that because philosophy allows you to take up as questions what are already presupposed answers in other disciplines. So, for example, in sociology, right, it's just taken for granted that there are other people, that we have knowledge of them, that, we come to know them in some way. And as a philosopher, you might ask how or why. And similarly, whereas physics works with a preconceived idea of what matter is, and while biology works with an amorphous conception of life, you might, in philosophy, be able to ask, well, what are those concepts really? How can we know them? And what is the core of what we mean when we say them? And so, for Kant, philosophy is important not simply because of the kinds of answers that it gives you to certain kinds of problems, but because it lets you go from having merely a kind of pre reflective, taking for granted approach to these assumptions to being able to question, interrogate, and test for yourself all of these concepts and beliefs. In that work, What is Enlightenment? Kant says that it's not that we live in an enlightened age, but that we live in the age of enlightenment. What did Kant mean by this? Well, Kant's meant to say that in his time, the process of enlightenment was far from over. It was far from the case that everyone had at that point matured, that they had no, need for external authority anymore at this point, and instead could follow their own reason. Kant, in other words, thought that his own time was only the beginning. Foucault similarly talks in his essay, which is named after Kant's essay, What is Enlightenment, about enlightenment not as a time period or a specific set of doctrines, but he calls it an attitude, right? An attitude of ceaseless questioning. And so Foucault, in an important sense, wrote his text in order to reflect in the 20th century on what the process of enlightenment looks like in his own time. Foucault was a kind of philosopher and historian. People will say broadly theorist because he's kind of hard to pinpoint in one way or another. But people will describe Foucault as someone who essentially concerned with relationships of power. These were things that Foucault contends that Kant didn't really sufficiently question during his own time, but that we have started questioning, ourselves, he says, speaking as a 20th century philosopher, late 20th century philosopher. So while Kant, was able to ask questions about the nature of morality, for example, the source of supreme moral principles, and so on, we now are able to ask the additional questions of, well, what power relationships are such that make these kinds of questions possible and, in fact, salient in a certain kind of context? And how, using the resources of you might say non-Western philosophies, can we question this style of approach? And so Foucault, too, even though he is, at least to some extent, critical of the approach that Kant took in his own essay, What is Enlightenment, he nonetheless saw himself broadly agreeing with Kant's general conception of enlightenment as consisting not in doctrines or something like that, right, but instead a spirit and ethos of continuous questioning. In our class, we've been able to discuss quite a few people that I think can be said to be really good representatives of this kind of spirit. We've talked, of course, about the figure of Socrates, who has for many, many centuries been viewed as a sort of Jesus figure, right? A martyr for the cause of philosophy and as someone who lived a genuinely philosophical life. But we can also see philosophical insights in the works of poets, in the works of activists, and maybe most importantly, in the beliefs and values of everyday people around you. If Kant is right that philosophy is valuable because it makes us more free, then the true impetus of philosophy does not belong to the professional philosopher. It's not, the person at C&M who teaches you or whatever that is the real exemplar of philosophy. The real exemplars of philosophy are those role models that we have in our everyday life. For me, for example, one of these figures is like my mom. My mom, even though she doesn't think about the supreme principle of moral judgments or something like that alongside Kant, or what the fundamental point is like Dogen or something like that, she has a conception of what it means to live a valuable life and what her actions need to be consonant with that. And it's reflected not only in her everyday behavior, but also how she treats other people, how she raised me, for example. And so you all, even before you entered this class, before you had any real engagement with professional or academic philosophy, you have known people in your life that were, in essence, philosophers. People that had a strong sense of self, who had a conception of the world in their own place within it. And very often, it's the people who have worked out ideas about this that we turn to for guidance in times of help. Professional philosophy, insofar as it's useful in any way at all, speaks to the same existential concerns that our everyday philosopher role models have themselves lived. And so Kant can still be valuable, even if he's a little abstract and so on, because he can give us tools in our everyday lives to rethink what we think is right and what we think is wrong, and what reasons we will accept for our behavior. I really resonate with a passage that we were able to look at together in this class from Epicurus that says that philosophy is best pursued by everyone, not the old and wise, not only those people who are entering into their adulthood, but everyone, children, teenagers, fully grown adults, people that are, towards the end of their life, right? Philosophy is valuable for all of them because it concerns the health of the soul. And the soul is itself healed in the pursuit of these questions. I hope that in this class you have gotten some resources for thinking about some own existential problems that will come up in your own life, whether that's having trouble with your job, whether that's dealing with anxiety, or facing the stark reality that you're going to die and that your time on this earth is, at least in some way, limited. You are now offered a lot of opportunities in your life to really take the necessary time to stop and reflect on these questions. And if this class has been really valuable, I hope that it's given you an opportunity for us to be able to do that together. So I'm really happy that I was able to, engage in this process with you and try to philosophize together. Okay, that's it. You will have a final exam that I will have an announcement in a rubric and talk to you all about. But otherwise, that is the end of this class. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about the remainder of the class. But it's been a real pleasure being able to share this semester with you all. I hope that it's gone really well for you and that you have a great time next semester or next year or whatever the coming months and years come to bring. Okay, bye.